there was a secret interview with the ANET developers on Devros podcast, the Lightbringers, talking about how they do and they make elite specs and weapons. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit on what they talked about, so then you can decide whether you should go watch it or not. So start turn from this and let's get into it. So, by the way, if you already know that you want to, do and check this interview, go into the description. I'll leave the link right there so you guys can see everything about it. Otherwise, I'll give a little bit of the pinpoints, not everything though, so you have a little bit of an incentive to go in there and check it out. But I'll give you a bit of more or less what I talked about in the podcast. They talked a lot about design in elite specs, why they did elite specs, how they do it, and stuff like this. Why did they go for weapons instead for elite specs? Which is actually a very interesting question, as they've been using elite specs all the time, and people didn't really like the idea of not getting elite specs each expansion. But they said that it was a bit, they had more design space to be able to do interesting stuff with weapons, as having too many elite specs is very, very difficult to balance around, and with weapons it was a bit easier. And they also talked about on how they decide which weapon to do, and they said that honestly most of the time it depends on the main creator of the weapon. Definitely talk with other people and the whole team on how the weapon is gonna be and when it's supposed to be. But if it's going to be a short bow, if it's going to be a mace or whatever, it depends on the person who is assigned to it and the person who really wants to take over the project, what they want to do and how they want the weapon how they want the weapon to feel. Also, they really like the idea. I think they also said that it was mostly Grouch's idea that putting every weapon to every elite spec, so everyone could use multiple weapons and be able to play around with them and have cool interactions with traits that you didn't used to be able to use. They also talked about how they design new weapons, and what they said essentially was like whenever they pick a new weapon in a new spec, they think, well, what is this spec missing? What is this class missing? For example, for NG, they decided that they need a little bit of a healing short range weapon. Obviously, of course, we're talking about Staff Warrior and how that was missing as well. And that's usually how they decide. They essentially try and fill up the holes in classes. So everyone, can play in every class, everything in some sort of way. They also talked about what do they like designing in each class. And they also talked about why do they like designing more weapons or elite specs, and they overall said that elite specs were more interesting, mainly because they can just really go ham with it. They can just be like, okay, I'm just they really can go with one idea and just go insanely hard with the professional mechanics and the traits. With a weapon, because they're kind of restricted, especially now considering the fact that they have to be interacted with every spec, they have to be a bit more careful in how everything works. They have to be a bit more, chill. They can't just go insanely hard on everything, because it's going to interact with everything in that class, which is definitely harder to design with. But they still like designing weapons anyways. They also talked about what was the hardest specs to design, and I think it was actually kind of interesting because, they said Ellie, because obviously, well, it has a lot of abilities. Even though I think this, what the person who said this was CMC, which I think mains Ellie in the first place, which is very, very interesting. They also talked about the thief, mainly because of how initiative works. You end up pressing one button all the time. It's a bit hard to balance and make a good balance in how things are gonna work on the weapon, so you don't end up just having one ability that overrides the other ones. They also talked about the feedback and how it has been for them as developers to take in the feedback and used it in order to make the game better. They said that the best places to get feedback, of course, and where usually they read it, is in the forums, on Reddit, sometimes in Twitch streams, or overall in the Reddit and forums, of course. And they also said that ideally, when you have feedback, is a little bit explaining on what the problem is. Not only I don't like this, but why they don't like it. That is very, very useful. But even after that, they said like every amount of feedback is good, even if it's just I don't like this. Even if they can't express why, it is very, very useful, and it's in their and it's their responsibility to figure out why this is happening in the first place. They also said that it was very, very valuable to have the feedback from the beta, as regardless of how many people they have working in the game and how skillful they are in their team, having the whole player base playing with the things that they had developed is way more useful to decide where there's a problem or where there isn't. And I found that very interesting because, well, yeah, I mean, it sounds kind of right. I mean, no one can really beat a whole player base trying to, break the game and have the best build, right? They also asked some questions that were very, very ambitious, and I really appreciate Dev and crew to actually ask these things in the first place. But they asked, will there be new weapons? Like, not only new weapons like moving, sword to a class that doesn't have it, but literally new things like great axe or spear or whatever. And, intelligently, the dev said, we can't really answer that because honestly, even if there was plans, they can't really confirm or deny because things could completely change. And I mean, I think it was very, brave for them to ask the question. So I commend them on that one, honestly. We have another very, very cool question about whether they're ever made like an insanely difficult, if they ever made an insanely overpowered, weapon on purpose in order to just, because they really like this spec or whatever, and they just want completely mad with it, like a mad scientist in their creation. And they said that they never on purpose, and I think that was very, very cute of them. They said like they never want something to be broken in the game. They never want to make something that would not work well in the game. They always said, no, we want the game to be good and in balance, right? But sometimes that can't really be done. They said that. For example, I think everyone had one example. CMC said that once they buffed Eliceptor in one patch, and because it was not really performing, and then eventually people were like, well, you really need to buff this more. It's not really enough. And they did that, and everyone's like, yeah, I mean, it's just not really. It's not really that good, but whatever, I guess. And he was like, oh, maybe I will have to buff it again later. And then in the middle of a season, right, like 2-3 weeks after the actual patch, people were like, oh my god, this is the most insane weapon ever. You guys need to nerf it. It was completely gonna destroy PvP or whatever. And it's like, well, sometimes I guess all the player base can't really get the actual optimal build until very, very late. And I think they said that they had to like do an actual hotfix in the middle of the of even like vacations or something, just because he was so important for the health of the game in PvP. I think it was. I think Treg said that they also had the same thing happen with Earth Signet, and they actually need to hotfix as well. I don't think Roy said anything about this one, but yeah, it was actually very, very very interesting. They also said that this always happens with Warrior. They always have like this, like, oh, Warrior sucks. This is not enough to make Warrior good. And every time, 2 months later, in the middle of the patch, people are like, well, this actually was broken all along, and we just didn't know, which is very, very funny. They also asked them what is their favorite weapons. And I found it really interesting that everyone was like, yeah, the weapons that we designed, of course. the weapons we designed, we really, really like them. I think Trig, of course, loves maces because he designed it. He also said that he really liked pistols, early pistols. And Roy, I think, really liked the warrior staff, mainly because I think he likes support a lot. And ended up being like, yeah, I really like this gameplay. We also talked a little bit on the actual balance that they talked about was coming in March. One of the questions was why Alack and Quickness are being pulled off of Warp's World, and they said that essentially they really, really like they didn't really like how much of those boons were in the in those game modes. They were very impactful, and you would have them way too much. The idea of having quickness and alacrity in Warp's World is supposed to be, not, all the time. It's supposed to be a thing that you really, take advantage of in a moment, right? As burst opportunities. And that was really what was happening. And that's why they decided to, have a, just cut it off. There's also some questions that I didn't reveal. For example, are there ever gonna be skill variants for the same weapons? Weapons that will flip and convert to something else with a new trait? Or are there any weapons that didn't make it into the beta? Go and check the real podcast to get those answers. Yeah, those are probably the most important things. Although I missed a few of the things that were very, very interesting about this podcast, because I want you guys to go see it. Jabro and crew, of course, prepared all of these questions, and they put a lot of their a lot of effort into doing this interview. So go check the whole podcast and check. I think Roy, I think CMC, I think Treg, and of course Kruf and Jabro, they're all very, very interesting people, very, very fun people. So, going in and checking the podcast out, support them. It's gonna be good for you because you're gonna have a lot of fun listening to them talk. It's very interesting, to go into the mind of a developer, especially in a game like that you love, that we love as much as we do on Guild Wars 2. So yeah, I definitely would recommend it. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Go watch that video, of course, and thank you for Jero for letting me make this video as well. See you guys around. Love you all. Bye bye.